Good evening. Welcome to an artist talk by Justin Clemens, an artist who has a solo show currently in the gallery. This is part of an artist talk series that we have throughout the year, funded by the Katherine Hyde Foundation. Justin Clemens is from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and currently lives in Columbus, Ohio. He earned his Bachelor of Fine Arts in Ceramics from RISD and a Master of Fine Arts from the University of Delaware. Clemens got his entrance to working in the arts through pottery and using clay and ceramics, and over time developed his approach to working in ceramics with a conceptual understanding of craft. Currently, Clemens lives in Columbus, Ohio, and is an assistant professor in the studio art program at Denison University. In the exhibition, We Buy Houses, Justin Clemens presents an ongoing body of work titled Raised Here, Raised Here, that investigates housing insecurity and issues of gentrification through a selective assessment of material and a visual language of a neighborhood in transition, in economic flux and tension of decline and development, and assessing the environment. Clemens asks, quote, how can the material and aesthetic effects of looking at crumbling buildings and homes in disrepair be translated into ceramic material and vessel form? So welcome, Justin.
Hello, everyone. Give me a second to share my screen. Thank you all for taking the time to be here this evening. I'm really excited to get a chance to talk to you about my exhibition, We Buy Houses. Thank you, everyone from Missouri Southern State, for hosting me and giving me this opportunity. My name is Justin Coleman, and the way I spell it has no vowels in it, which can create a lot of confusion in the way that my name can be perceived often. So with that, I would like to begin talking about We Buy Houses. As Christine was saying in my introduction, this work is very much about looking at neighborhoods in the city, particularly urban neighborhoods and Black neighborhoods, and thinking about the lived experience that happens there, thinking about the buildings and structures that are there, thinking about the lives of those buildings, the states that they're in, and the way that they hold value, personal value, economic value, and value in many different ways. So the primary body of work that I'm showing in this exhibition is something I've been working on for the past few years, and it's a body of ceramics that I've been calling Raised Here, Raised Here. With the idea that, you can live in a place as you were raised there, but then also see a place get torn down, like in this image, when a building's being raised. And that's one of my big questions about what buildings get to stay and what buildings get to remain. What marks are on the buildings, what messages they send, what memories they hold, what stories they tell. Recently, I wrote a list of inspirations talking about the Raised Here works. And this is what I come up with: ceramic shards, all kinds and eras, improvisational construction methods, and ad hoc building solutions, faded graffiti and faded street signs, and lastly, the music, poetry, and wisdom of Gil Scott-Heron. I'm going to talk about the first three: ceramic shards, improvisational construction methods, as I'm calling it, and what I feel and read into faded graffiti and faded signs. I included this inspiration, referring to Gil Scott-Heron, because I'm really interested in not only his oeuvre of music, but his legacy and his intellectualism. I'm really interested in his ability to see the bigger picture, be able to pose critique, be able to use critique with humor and cry and be passionate all at the same time. If you haven't listened to Gil Scott-Heron's music, I recommend that you do. So for ceramic shards, I really am interested in finding ceramics anywhere that I travel. Recently, I've been very, very into bricks, and I use a lot of bricks in the raised here works. I grew up in a neighborhood that was filled with a lot of brick buildings, and bricks always seemed like they were in abundance. Here's me holding a brick that was actually found in Egypt. And it's an Egyptian brick. It's an ancient brick. I got a chance to look at a collection of bricks at the Denison Museum and took this photo. I'm just thought this would be good to include for my enthusiasm for all things ceramic and brick and old. When I was in Joplin installing the show, I wanted to look around the area, and I found a marker that was the intersection between Kansas, Oklahoma, and Missouri, in which I found a brick and stopped the truck and took the brick. Here's some drainage pipe shards, sewer pipe shards that I had found in a hillside in Ohio and collected and brought back to my studio and have been using within my work. This is one of the pieces that has been printed on with ceramic glaze and refired. This is one of the works in the Missouri Southern State Show. Here's another found brick. This is just an untitled gold brick, I call it. This is a brick found far on the East Coast near Cape Cod that had been tumbled in the ocean to gain those really soft edges and this very porous kind of look. This is another piece that shows my joy for all things ceramics and brick and ceramic shards. And this is something that is the actual size of a brick. You could use it as a brick, but it is all made of collected ceramic shards and brick parts, glaze and refired back into a full ceramic form. I feel like this does well connecting a lot of the ideas I'm interested in, thinking about craft solutions, material, and memory. When I think about ad hoc building solutions, and there are many, I'm often looking at how people chose to do repairs. And here we see someone that replaced these ornate salt glazed bricks, texturized salt glazed bricks with your standard cement block. And I'm interested in the pattern that happens from it. I'm interested in, as one of my colleagues would say, the non-drawing drawing that has occurred. Here's another very interesting texture found in a building, likely damaged, maybe trucked back into it, but you get to see the inside of all the bricks, creating this beautiful kind of pattern. I think these are the kinds of material effects that really stick with me that I want to use as a way to create these expressions and express the observations I'm making within my work. Here's another, what I think is a great and beautiful, well-done solution of going back with some flat slate inside of a concrete block wall on a church's stairway and making something that's ornate. So I would consider this well done for an ad hoc solution. Yet another, more found field stones, loosely stacked in an alley, just creating a barrier. And although this is something that kind of looks like a vertically oriented pile of rubble in a way, you can see there's a lot of care to it. If you look back in the yard, there's a cistern behind there that runs with a pump. And then there's another stacked wall creating a series of tiers and layers throughout the yard. I took this photo today, actually, thinking about a great solution that I saw recently. So this is an alley nearby where I live, and a person's fence fell down. And what they did to solve this problem was they trimmed all the overgrown weeds, right? And then went and dragged them back into where the hole is in the fence, which I think is actually kind of brilliant. Faded signs and faded graffiti. I think there's a story to be told. When I look at old graffiti, I think about the time it's been since that person put their message there. I think about what it means to make that mark. I think about the significance of that mark to the people that live in this space. I'm from a neighborhood called Manchester in Pittsburgh on the north side. And I do a lot of what I consider sort of my musing and thinking, the work that gets me to go into the studio, walking around and making observations. I'd like you to notice that 1700 block down there in yellow underneath someone's, handwritten sign of where you're at, Manchester. Old street signs of a revitalization effort that's forgotten. Graffiti on a building that has to be 50 years old, that's still there. And the layers is what really gets me. It's what I really like about this. It's at a point where it's not really legible, but you can almost feel the year after year, the markings built on top. And just the wear, how objects left to the elements outside without maintenance gain a particular kind of wear. And I think that's beautiful. These signs here are really important to my work. These are the signs that the city of Pittsburgh puts up on buildings that are going to be demolished. And they're dated, they're legal documents. And so oftentimes I can go and I could see how long this has been slated for demolition and to what degree of severity that building state is actually in. So this is one with all three of these, with the blue condemnation sticker, which is a motif that I will use in my work through on ceramic surfaces and through printing, next to the imminent danger sticker, next to the city demolition sticker. This building's in bad shape. Let me take a moment to talk about some of the artists that I think are really relevant to the work that I'm making. And there's a lot, I can't quite name them all, but I'd like to name an important few. First is Beverly Buchanan, who would make these block sculptures from cement, clay, and often take impressions of the insides of buildings. And I like this minimalist language to sort of bring you into the miniature of these kind of architectural and urban constructions, while they also have the visuals, the physical wear that happens with building materials. Here in this piece, you can see this stack of cast blocks that retains an impression of a wainscoting, a decorative wall element that has left a impression on the casting, very similar to what you would see in Rachel Whiteread's work. This is more Beverly Buchanan's work of these series later in her career called Alley Shacks. Again, this is about the idea of the building itself, what it contains, and the state that it's in. Uh, this work is also very much inspired by some of the work of Roberto Lugo. Roberto Lugo's a potter who also makes work using very similar elements in the relationship to graffiti, in the relationship to urban and hood stylings, and also works using the vessel form. And I do think that the richness of his surfaces are really notable in how they create a juxtaposition of what you may see in an urban space, an urban aesthetic, with that of traditional and historic ceramics. Now, I know not everybody here in this talk this evening is able to see the We Buy Houses show. For those who are at MSSU, these are pictures of Roberto Lugo doing a performance piece called The Ghetto is Resourceful, in which the performance is to go to a vacant lot and they look to mine some clay and they kind of fabricate a potter's wheel on the spot and go about making a piece of pottery with this wheel. And in the video piece, Fly Sneakers and the Dope Sofa, I do a similar kind of performance. Although it's based in carpentry, it's a similar idea of working to be resourceful with what you have in an unexpected place. And lastly, in this list of artists is an artist named Laurent Crassel, who makes these finely crafted porcelain works. But then each of the works is going through something that the material itself can't actually go through, something that's material much softer, much more like akin to a body would go through. So you see the impact, you see these violent moments with these very delicate kinds of objects. And it's that juxtaposition, but it's also the high level of detail that goes into the works. And of course, I very much appreciate this with the brick, the impact of the brick. In these raised here works, I'm drawing this parallel in between these really ornate porcelain vessels and very ornate homes. I think homes in general are of a high value, and so they don't necessarily have to be ornate to be at the same level of status, if you will, social status or representation of class aspirations. When I think about pottery forms compared to houses and homes, initially, they seem really divergent. But many times when I go back and I look at them side by side, I can start to see other connections. So with these two side by side, I can start to see how you can look at the top part of the roof where you see these dormers, windows, right? And I parallel that to the vessel form where I see this line that separates the lid from the body of the pot. If I go down to the bottom of the house and I look at its foundation in this gray band made of sandstone, right? I can also see a similar kind of line, a dividing line towards the bottom when I also look at the pottery too. So the more I've studied these, the more that these forms, I can start to see how they come together and speak to each other. This is a piece that is in the We Buy Houses show that was a predecessor, a proto work for the Raised Here series. So this is a platter I found at an antique store that I think was maybe a Staffordshire. It was a British pottery. a big name manufacturer. And I took this work and it had flower prints already on it. And I continued to print other layers back on top of it, including Air Force One shoe footprints, as well as a Gucci pattern printed over the back. In the process of firing the plate, it ended up breaking. So I used this technique of kintsugi, where you will basically epoxy or lacquer two pieces of ceramic back together with either a real or faux gold dust inside of your adhesive to make this connection. And before I glued it together, I thought more about what this piece could mean and what I can do with it. And I decided to try to memorialize an important landmark in Pittsburgh up until the early 2000s when it was demolished. This apartment building that's on the upper half of this platter was the Penn Circle Towers, which was through most of my life a center point, a hub for Black community in Pittsburgh. There were shopping districts nearby, and it sat dead center to it. This is a picture of it. You can see how there's a road that actually runs completely underneath it. Well, eventually, without much notice to the city, it had gotten demolished. And the whole area was getting redeveloped. Within this, many people in Pittsburgh were forcibly relocated. More pictures of the rubble and last bit of the teardown. But these are the kinds of stories I've become interested in trying to document. Here's a piece that I think does well talking about my goals for the work. It's one where I had made a piece of pottery and it ended up cracking. And in the process of it cracking, before it was fired, I decided that there had to be a way I could fix it or continue working with it. So after time in the studio, I was able to come up with the solution where I could kind of join or marry it to this piece of drainage pipe and then put it back in the kiln and refire it to be all one piece. And I appreciated that as an ad hoc solution, as an improvisational method of construction. And as I continued to work on the surface and think more about these bigger concepts that inspire this work, I got to thinking about progress and the question of like, what is progress? And this idea that like, progress for some isn't always progress for others. And that progress, the idea of it, right, of moving forward in a way that's equitable is an extremely precarious kind of endeavor, very difficult to balance. And so thus I named this piece the precarity of progress. It sits on this brick almost as if the scale was going to tip. Much of the work in the show, or much of my wanderings through the city, looking at buildings, looking at the landscape, happened in Pittsburgh on the north side. But I live in Columbus. And I live in a neighborhood with different architecture, but going through very similar things. And so this was a church that I saw taking a walk one day last winter, and I felt a very deep empathy for. And I created this piece named after the church. This is the New Hope Church of God. And I ended up making this porcelain vessel as almost an homage or a translation, homage to and a translation of that building. And in works like these, I've tried to reach back and use botanical motifs. So in here, you can actually see botanical drawings of knotweed, an invasive plant that, left unchecked will take over city blocks and empty lots. You can see a dandelion over on the left side of this, right, this plot. And so part of what I'm doing, again, is connecting these things where botanical drawings, flowers, and ornamental plants is a very common and traditional motif in ceramics. And so here I am trying to continue with that motif, but subvert it back and think about, right, what grows in these locales that I'm studying and spending time in. In doing this work, I walk a lot in alleys. And so I do see a lot of what I consider to be alley shacks. And these shacks here in these next couple photos are shacks that I feel connect to some of Beverly Buchanan's work that I was showing earlier. So these are two pieces, two in a series that are both called alley shacks that are representations, again, translations of these kinds of buildings. Another piece that's in We Buy Houses is a piece called Esther's Store. Now, on the left side of this image, you see a building with a stone facade. And in this next image, you're looking down this same block, and you can actually see just a sliver of that same stone facade. Now, inside of that building, when I was growing up, there was a store. And this store was through the porch doors, through the vestibule, into the right, which would be a living room. And it was literally a store in someone's living room. I mean, and they had, if you needed milk, they had it, candy for days, right? Your basic snacks and provisions. And it was really just sort of like this uncharted kind of store that was great community support. As a child leaving elementary school, you could go there with 10 cents and get 10 pieces of candy. You get home and be out of milk, and your mom can send you up the street to get that liter of milk or whatever. And it was just this wonderful, wonderful sort of social hub. It hasn't been there for years, 30 years or so, but it was really, really important to the community back then. This is the street that Esther's store was on. And it's a beautiful, beautiful street and has been very well maintained. But 30 years ago, it was in a different place. So these is the kind of what I mean about a neighborhood in transition, right? These are the things that I'm kind of trying to keep memory of in this work that I'm making, but also talk a lot about what these signs of transition are. So this is the piece I made for Esther's store. I got to take a second to just say, when I go out and I take these walks and I take photos of buildings, I'm really engaged with what I'm looking at and what I'm thinking about. But I have these moments where I have to recognize that it's I'm very lucky and very privileged to be able to have the time to think about these things and be able to make art about these things, right? I have this privilege that much of what I am, the people who are represented in this work I'm making usually do not have. And that's important for me to recognize. This image here, I really, really appreciate this image. I appreciate the layers of wall covering. One says Everbuilt, and if you look very, very closely behind it, you'll see the Tyvek brand. And I appreciate how it becomes so masked, right? The whole building is entirely covered to be preserved, obviously, but it's also reading differently. It speaks differently. And I think this is some of those visual parts of the visual language I'm trying to pick up. I also really appreciate the exposed field stones on the bottom left of this building where the stairs used to be. Again, elements that I look to translate into the work I make. This piece is called 1200s Code Violation. And in this work, you can see the building wrap, the Tyvek logo very clearly, but you can also see the blue condemnation placard in this same printing. So again, this is speaking to those buildings, right? And really trying to take in what I see in the visual and bring it to this vessel and this the traditions of making in ceramics. I also would like you to note the 1200s sign down there, where I think that, to me, when I asked you to remember the yellow 1700s sign that was graffiti that was painted on one of the buildings, to me, this is speaking to that same sort of thing. In this work, I appreciate that what would be neighborhood markings, street markings, or gang graffiti is juxtaposed next to what would be official language for building code violations, right? Talking about two different codes of existence, of understanding, of navigating space. This is a small building. You can see it has the blue placards on the right window. So it's slated for demolition. And this is a building, you know, I just, as a kid, would catch the bus in front of here to go to school. And so for a building like this, we have this piece. I've been making a smaller series within the Raised Here works called 1-800 Board Up. One time I really did, I saw a building get boarded up, and they had big stencils on all the boards that went over the windows. That was their number if you needed their assistance. That was 1-800 Board Up. And I've never forgot that. And so when I see boarded up buildings, I think about who does that service. And so I've continued that, moving into the titles for these pieces that are representations of these buildings. When I take these walks around, I walk similar paths. And in doing that, I get to see how the buildings are changing over time. I check on them. I go back, I see what happened here, see what happened there. These are photos that I had taken in the fall of 22. I've always loved this series of buildings ever since I was a kid. I had a particular infatuation with this blue building in the back, that smaller carriage house. But I just thought that this was just such an amazing lot and structure. So over time, I would watch this back section slowly deteriorate. And lo and behold, one day I come back this winter and that whole section is ripped off the back. So I thought this was it. The building's going to be torn down any day now. It's going to be gone. It's no longer going to be here. And I went out on a walk examining these buildings, and I went with my mother. And as we walked past this one, she said, "Oh, I gotta inform you. I gotta get you caught up to speed here. From what I know, what's happening with this is that they're actually going to rebuild this and connect the building on the front to the building in the back, and they're going to make that a daycare," which I thought was really, really amazing. Because for all of my concern about these buildings getting torn down when people need housing, for all of my concerns about how the buildings have been neglected and left in a state of disrepair, here's one that was really on the chopping block. It has the stickers on it. It's going to happen, right? That someone went and they made the decision to save. And that always, always really strikes me about what buildings get saved and what buildings get raised. Building next door, however, is in a different place. It's one that still is poised to be on the chopping block, but this building actually is in a different situation, right? So as the story continued, this is a building where it was left, it reached a state of disrepair. The owner passed and gave it to their family. Now, their family has this wonderful, potentially gorgeous, wonderful plot and potentially gorgeous Victorian building on their hands. However, there's enough back taxes on the building that the family member who's inherited it cannot pay the back taxes to get access to the building. So they essentially got handed a liability, right? And when I think about what are some of the more economic, financial, fiscal traps that can happen to people that, you know, are in the working class struggle, so to speak, this is one of them, right? Ending up with a great property that, in essence, you can't afford to get into. And this is how these things happen. These are the reasons why buildings get torn down. Because I look at all these Victorian buildings, at least in Pittsburgh, I decided to call this piece the Ghetto Gentry Home. Because I feel like, similar to this last one, right, there's some really cool things, amazing parts about this building. And these are similar to the buildings that myself and my neighbors all lived in when I was growing up. So I thought more blankly or broadly that I would create one that's more loosely an homage to like the whole style, that they could almost try to epitomize so much of what these buildings are going through. Now I'm getting ready to wrap up this discussion, and I hope that the talking points that I've given and images can help bring closer what I'm thinking and feeling when I move around a city and how I take that to the work that I'm making. I wanted to end on this image because I know that there's a lot of my students out there, and there's a lot of students, art students at Missouri Southern State. And I saw this piece of graffiti several months ago, and I was like, I really, really need to let students know the art is hard, that even the people out doing it illegally understand it's not easy, and they lament it. You know, but this is what we do. This is what we work through. So thanks everyone for listening, and I really appreciate all of the support from Christine and everyone, particularly the student assistants, getting We Buy Houses installed at Missouri Southern State. I really appreciate all the support from my colleagues and my family of students at Denison. and anyone else that had the time to stop in and listen to me take you on this visual tour. So thank you.
So I'm going to turn it over to questions in just a moment, but did Justin leave?
Nope, I'm here.
Oh, okay. I wanted to apologize. I have Coleman in all of my notes. I'm not sure why my mind went to a different direction, but
Don't worry.
yeah. So are there any questions? Yes.
Did your work in ceramics always start out that way, or was it more of a progression from your inspiration and looking at buildings?
Good question. Thank you. My work in ceramics started out with just a passion to make stuff. And I just was really, really excited about making pottery and having my hands in clay. And then that kind of like took me off into the world of wanting to be an artist. And over that time, and it's, been a while, I've gone through all different phases of making. Some things that are exclusively ceramics, some things that are not exclusively ceramics, that are, working in completely different materials. But I find myself always coming back to ceramics. And when I do come back to it, I have these new ideas. I have ways of thinking that I've learned operating as an artist through all different mediums and growing as an artist that then get translated into the new work that I make. So I would say that most of the raised here stuff is like the way I think about it is all become, it's very authentic to me, but it's also new work compared to the way that I would do things 10, 15 years ago.
Any other questions? It doesn't seem like we have any other questions. Justin, thank you so much. And I wanted to also thank you for taking so much time with our student workers with the install. You had lots of great feedback, and they really appreciated it as well. And if there are any other questions, we do have a reception following the talk. The code word for any of my students on Zoom is just ceramics. So hopefully we'll see you over for the reception. Thank you again, Justin, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, everyone.